Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Life Stories. My name is Trent, and as usual, I hope you're all doing awesome as always. Today, we got some stories coming at you from, you guessed it, Reddit/idontworkherelady. So, without further ado, let's get started. Our first story of the day is titled, I'm Not in the Military, Shove Off. This was years ago. My husband was in the Army on his second enlistment, 5 or 6 years total at this point. He'd already been through a couple of deployments by this point. We were at a new base overseas, and I'd gotten a job at the after-school care facility on post. Well, his unit was getting ready to deploy for 6 months, so they were in the thick of all that. The chaplain was having a pre-deployment meeting for all the spouses to talk about the changes to expect while our spouses were deployed, from practical issues to emotional stuff to disruptions in routine. Bear in mind, this was back when, if you were really lucky, you may get a 10-minute call from your spouse once a month. Maybe an email as well. Letters were still more common than anything. Now, both my husband and I are pretty easygoing, and we'd both been through a couple of deployments, so I already knew the drill, what to expect, how to manage, etc. So, I decided not to bother with the meeting. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a fantastic resource for spouses. And they would do a post-deployment one as well to help everyone transition back to normal life with their spouses. But I didn't feel the need to attend. A couple of days later, my husband shows up at my workplace and tells me he's been ordered by his lieutenant to bring me to the spouse meeting. This was a second lieutenant who was fresh out of OCS, was not priorly enlisted, and my husband had socks older than this guy's term of military service. For those who don't know, a second lieutenant is the lowest ranked officer. They're the noobs, and it's very common for them to think they know it all and act accordingly. This guy was one of those. I was highly peeved, but not for one moment did I blame my husband. I could tell he was annoyed as well, and I knew that since it was a direct order, that he had to obey it. I thought for a minute and asked him to hang on a minute so I could talk to my boss. Now, school was set to let out soon, and they needed me there because of the adult-child ratio requirements. But I explained the situation to my boss and told her I'd be back as soon as possible. She understood the situation and said she'd fill in for me until I get back. She was cool that way, and everyone on base, if they weren't military, was the spouse of one, due to being on an overseas base. So they all knew and understood when stuff like this came up. Very rarely you'd get the random GS employee civilian on post. But yeah, that was highly unusual. So I left with my husband, but instead of going to the chaplain's meeting, I told him to take me to his building where the second lieutenant was. He knew what I was up to and happily complied. I arrived at the lieutenant's office, knocked, and went in while my husband stood in the hall. I asked him why he had ordered my husband to fetch me from my job that I was needed at. He rather pompously mansplained to me that this was a required function and that I needed to attend. Oh, I let him have it. I didn't raise my voice, much, but I informed him that in no uncertain terms, that he had no authority whatsoever to order me to do anything. I was not in the military, not subject to his whims, and while he may be able to order my husband to come get me, he could not order me to go to his meeting. He tried interjecting at this point to say that I needed to go so that I would learn stuff about how to handle my husband being on a deployment. At this point, I nearly blew my top. I've spent more time with my husband being in the field and on deployments than you've spent in the military. My husband does not own me. He cannot force me to do anything, and neither can you. I will not be attending the meeting, and you will not force my husband to take me there. I'm going back to my job, and if I hear that you tried to make his life miserable because of it, so help me I will go up your chain of command and make sure you regret it. Now, the building was not full, but it wasn't quite empty either. Oh, and the higher-ups were in their offices pretty close by. They were also super cool cats. My husband might have been enlisted, but they respected the work he did, and he respected them. And this lieutenant had been getting on their nerves as well. So yeah, they absolutely could hear what was going on, and I'm sure they enjoyed it. By the end of my tirade, the second lieutenant was nearly falling over himself to apologize. "Sorry, ma'am, I apologize, ma'am. It won't happen again, ma'am." He knew he was in the wrong, and by this point, he also knew I'd make a right royal stink if he tried to make me do anything, or tried to push my husband for my actions, or lack thereof. I left, and my husband took me back to my job, grinning like a fool. I was still pretty enraged at this point, but was cooling off pretty rapidly. For a couple weeks afterward, I actually was concerned that there might be fallout for my husband because of what I did, but there wasn't. At least not more than the usual BS he dealt with on a daily basis. It was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Like I said, I'm pretty laid back normally, but I will get steamed on other people's behalf. The problem is, I almost never have the opportunity or the right to get involved. And I recognize that sometimes doing so would definitely make bad worse. So, having this opportunity was just golden. Yes, the classic tale of guy gets promotion and all of a sudden thinks he runs the place. Good on you for putting him in his place. And moving right along, our next story is titled, Take Me Out of Your Group Text. Not exactly the premise for this sub, but very much in the spirit. Years ago, before chat apps where you seamlessly can set up a group chat with lots of people were common, group texts were how people communicated when you wanted to reach a lot of people at once and wanted them to see it, because no one checked their email regularly. It was not ideal, as depending on people's quality of service, quality of phone, or just how many people were trying to send a text, or Lord forbid, a picture at the same time, texts showed up out of order, or sometimes took hours for some to receive them. You'd be surprised how much battery receiving a bunch of texts would drain your battery as well. It was during this time that my partner, then still a friend, was accidentally added to a text group full of 15 or so soccer moms and the coach, because whoever set it up mistyped one of the mom's phone numbers. Oh yeah, another drawback of text groups? You had to put in every number by hand if you didn't already have them registered in your phone. It was a more primitive time. They were quick to bring up that they mistyped a number and that they needed to make another one, this time including the mom that got left out when they mistakenly put in the wrong number. The mistake was acknowledged, but they kept on sending texts like, "It's too hard to make a new one. Just silence your phone. This is a necessary group text for our kids," etc. Oh, another throwback? Holy crap, there were a lot. You couldn't take yourself out of a group text back then, and blocking numbers wasn't an option on all cell phone carriers or plans. My future partner started getting really pissed, and their phone kept on ringing throughout the day, and didn't know if someone was trying to get a hold of them, or if it was the soccer moms. They made their anger known and used some colorful language, questioning their intelligence and humanity, and demanding that they stop using the group text. Apparently, some of the moms missed the initial texts, saying they were not one of the soccer moms. They responded with, "Do you speak to your son like that? You should be banned from the field." "It's okay, coach. Some of us appreciate what you do." This had been going on for 3 days, and the soccer moms kept on using the chat, which has now devolved into calling my partner rude. So, they escalated their response. They Googled cat autopsy pictures and started spamming it to the chat. The soccer moms were horrified and threw a fit. "How dare you, you sick freak! This is harassment!" were among the text sent from the group. Every time one of the moms demanded they stop, all they said was, "Take me out of the group," and only that, followed by more cat autopsy pictures. It lasted a couple of hours, and they admitted later that the group text finally started getting fun, but they seemed to abandon the group text. No idea if they felt like starting another one was worth it, but at least they didn't mistakenly put my partner's phone number in. It truly was a more primitive time. Hey, as you would all know, I am always in favor of sticking it to the Karens and the soccer moms of the world. But cat autopsy pics? Really? That's, pretty upsetting. I guess if you're trying to get the point across, though, it'll work. And moving on, we got enough time for one more story. So, moving on, our story is Covidiot Tries to Touch Me. I've never had an I don't work here experience in my life until yesterday. My partner and I were at a home improvement store where the employees wear maroon socks or aprons. I was wearing a black tulle shirt and a bright sky blue jacket. He was wearing a blue sweater and jeans. We both were wearing masks and gloves and talking about whether the planter we were looking at would sit well on the rails of our deck. All of a sudden, a woman wearing no mask and no gloves comes within 3 feet of me, almost in between us, and starts asking questions about a dead plant she's holding. I politely tell her that we don't work there, and she starts cackling wildly, reaching out to grab my arm. I hopped backwards to avoid her and curtly say, "Don't touch me, please." She rolls her eyes at me and scurries off with her flatbed cart, and supposed dead plant, in what I assume is in search of someone who actually works there. All the while, my partner is looking at me with what I imagine is a look of total shock, but I can only see his eyes, which were huge. We were surprised, though, at the level of audacity this woman had in trying to grab me that it took us a second to get back to what we were discussing. I'm just super grateful she didn't actually get a hold. I know this post is pretty tame in comparison to some, but I was definitely at a loss for words. Hey, in times like these, if you're trying to stay clean and people are reaching out to grab you with their grubby little hands, you got every right to be shocked and want to tell people about it. Anyway, with that out of the way, we are out of time for today's episode, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Trent, and I want to thank you guys once again for tuning into Life Stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Reddit content we got working coming your way, and I hope to see you guys soon.